It was 6:47 in the morning when my doorbell camera pinged. I was still in bed, half asleep, reaching for my phone on the nightstand the way you do when you're not fully conscious yet. I figured it was a package, maybe the neighbor's dog again. I squinted at the screen. My grandfather was standing on my front porch in 29-degree weather. He had on his brown cardigan, the thin one he always wore around the house, and a pair of slippers. Not shoes, slippers. The kind with the rubber sole that's more decorative than functional. He was holding a plastic grocery bag in one hand, and he was just standing there, not ringing the bell, not knocking, just standing. I was out of bed before I even realized I was moving. By the time I got to the front door and pulled it open, he'd been out there for at least 6 minutes. I know, because the camera logs the timestamp. 6 minutes in 29 degrees. His lips had gone a little gray. His hands were shaking around that grocery bag like he was trying to hold on to something. Grandpa, my voice came out weird, tight. What? How did you get here? He looked up at me, and the thing that broke me, the thing I still think about, was that he smiled, this small, apologetic smile, and he said, I didn't want to be a bother. I wasn't sure if you'd want me. I pulled him inside. I didn't say anything for a second because I couldn't. I just got him to the couch, wrapped the throw blanket around his shoulders, and went to the kitchen to start the kettle. And while I stood there waiting for the water to boil, I looked at that grocery bag he'd set on the counter. Inside it, one change of clothes, his blood pressure medication, his wallet, and a framed photo of my grandmother, who passed 8 years ago. That's all they gave him. That's all they packed. My grandfather, I'll call him Grandpa Walt because that's what everyone has called him his whole life, is 82 years old. He spent 34 years as a postal carrier in Dayton, Ohio. He mowed his own lawn until he was 79. He's the kind of man who fixes things instead of replacing them, who sends birthday cards with handwritten notes inside, who remembers how you take your coffee even if he hasn't seen you in 6 months. He is not a burden. He has never been a burden. My parents took him in 3 years ago after he had a minor stroke. It wasn't debilitating. His speech came back fully, his mobility stayed good, but his doctor recommended he not live alone anymore, and my parents had a 4-bedroom house with a finished basement. At the time, they made it sound like the most natural thing in the world. My mother called me and said, "We're bringing Dad home. It's the right thing to do." I remember feeling relieved, proud of them even. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was what was happening to his money. My grandfather gets a federal pension from his years with USPS. It's not a fortune, but it's steady, around $1,900 a month, plus his Social Security, which adds another $1,400. So roughly $3,300 a month coming in every month like clockwork. When he moved in with my parents, they said they'd help him manage his finances because his hands shake a little now, and online banking is confusing for him. He trusted them. Of course he trusted them. They were his daughter and son-in-law. By the time I found out what was actually going on, they had drained just over $94,000 from his accounts over 26 months. Not all at once. Little by little, the way you slowly turn up the heat so the frog doesn't notice. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The morning I found Grandpa Walt on my porch, I let him warm up and eat something before I asked him anything. He had oatmeal. He ate slowly and carefully the way older people do, and we talked about nothing. The weather, whether I'd gotten a new rug in the living room, he noticed, how the neighbor's maple tree was coming back after that ice storm last winter. Then, when his color had come back and his hands had stopped shaking, I sat down across from him and I said, "Grandpa, who brought you here?" He set down his spoon. "Your mother. Mom dropped you off. She said they needed some time. She had a bag packed. She said you'd be expecting me." He paused. "Were you expecting me?" "No," I said, "but I'm glad you're here." He nodded, slowly. He's not a man who shows a lot of emotion, but right then I saw something move across his face that I can only describe as relief mixed with shame, the particular shame of someone who has been made to feel like a problem to be solved. I told him he could stay as long as he wanted. that this was his house too, as far as I was concerned. He said he didn't want to impose. I told him there was no such thing as imposing when it came to him. Then I went to the bathroom, closed the door, and called my mother. She answered on the second ring, and before I could say a single word, she said, "I knew you'd be dramatic about this." Dramatic, I repeated. "He's fine, he's with you, you have the space." Mom, you dropped an 82-year-old man off in 29-degree weather in his house slippers. He chose to wear those. I told him to put on real shoes. I stood there in my bathroom, one hand braced against the sink, just breathing for a second. "How long?" I asked. "How long were you planning this?" "It's not something we planned. It's just your father and I need our life back. Malt is getting harder to manage. He wanders at night. He asks the same questions. It's exhausting, and we've given up years of our life and nobody seems to appreciate." "I'm calling Adult Protective Services," I said. She laughed. Actually laughed. "For what? He's with family. He's fine." "He's going to be fine," I said. "That I can promise you." I ended the call, sat down on the edge of my bathtub, and stayed there for a while. The first call I made was not to Adult Protective Services. It was to my grandfather's bank. I'd helped him set up his online account 2 years earlier, and he'd put me on as an authorized contact, not on the account itself, but as someone the bank could speak with if he requested it. When I explained the situation to the branch manager, a woman named, well, I'll just say she was patient and kind and took everything I said seriously. She suggested I come in with my grandfather in person. We went that afternoon. What the bank showed us, sitting in a little glass-walled office with a box of tissues on the desk, was 3 years of transactions. My grandfather's pension and Social Security had been depositing faithfully every month. The withdrawals told a different story. Cash withdrawals, transfers to an account in my mother's name, payments to a credit card I'd never heard of, a recurring $800 a month household contribution that my grandfather had apparently signed off on. Though when we looked at the paperwork, the signature didn't look quite right. His hands shake now. Someone who knew what they were doing could have guided that pen. My grandfather sat very still through all of it. When the bank manager finished walking us through the statements, he said, "How much?" She told him. He said, $94,000. "Yes, sir. Over approximately 26 months. He lifted his hands in his lap. He didn't cry. He just said, very quietly, "She's my daughter." That's the part that stays with me, not the money. Though the money matters, it absolutely matters. But those 3 words, the weight of them, "She's my daughter." As if that fact alone should have been enough to prevent all of it. Here's what I did next, and I want to be specific, because I think specificity matters when people ask me what they should do if this happens to them. First, I contacted Adult Protective Services that same evening. An investigator came to my home within 48 hours. I showed them the camera footage of my grandfather being dropped off. I showed them the bank statements. I gave them the timeline. They opened a case. Second, I called an elder law attorney. I found one through the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys directory. There's a free referral tool on their website. We had a consultation within a week. She explained that what had happened potentially constituted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, which is a criminal offense in Ohio, and that we should simultaneously pursue civil recovery of the funds and look at guardianship to protect my grandfather going forward. Third, and this is the one that surprised me the most, I called the local USPS Retiree Association just on a hunch. My grandfather had been a dues-paying member for years. They connected me with an advocate who helps retirees navigate financial exploitation situations. I hadn't known that resource existed. It was free. My mother called me 4 times in those first 3 days. Each call was a different version of the same argument. I was tearing the family apart. My grandfather was confused about the money. The transfers were for expenses. She and my father had sacrificed enormously, and this was how they were being repaid. On the 4th call, my uncle, her brother, who lives in Columbus, called me separately to tell me I was being a drama queen and I should let the adults handle it. I stopped answering. The guardianship process took 11 weeks. It is not fast. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect the legal system to move the way it does on television, and it doesn't. There are forms, there are hearings, there are evaluations. A court appointed physician examined my grandfather to assess his capacity. The assessment showed that while he has some mild cognitive changes consistent with his age, he is capable of making decisions for himself. He just needed someone to help him manage the financial side, which is what my parents had ostensibly been doing. The court appointed a professional fiduciary to oversee his accounts while the case was pending. That meant my parents could no longer touch a single dollar. My mother hired a lawyer. For about 3 weeks, things got ugly. Her attorney sent letters claiming that the transfers had been consensual, that my grandfather had agreed to contribute to household expenses, that I had alienated him from his family. My grandfather, to his credit, was consistent every single time anyone asked him. He had not agreed to contribute $800 a month. He had not agreed to any of the larger transfers. He had signed what he was told to sign without fully understanding what it said. At one hearing, my grandfather sat in that courtroom in his good jacket, the gray herringbone one he's had for 20 years, and he answered every question clearly and calmly. The judge asked him where he wanted to live. He said, "With my granddaughter if she'll have me." He didn't look at my mother when he said it. The judge granted me guardianship of his estate. Not his person, he didn't need that, he's sharp enough, just his finances. His accounts were transferred. The professional fiduciary reviewed everything and confirmed the court's assessment. The transfers were not legitimate household expenses. They were exploitation. My parents were ordered to repay $94,000. Not immediately, the court structured a repayment plan, but it's on the record. Legally binding. And because the APS investigation had run parallel, the matter was referred to the county prosecutor's office for review. I don't know yet what will come of that. I may never know. But it's on the record. That matters. In the weeks after the guardianship was finalized, life got quieter. My grandfather settled into my guest room like he'd always been there. He reorganized my linen closet without asking, which I found hilarious. He started taking his morning walk again. Just to the end of the block and back, but still. He called his old mail carrier buddies from Dayton. He watched the news every evening at 6 and had opinions about everything. He ate dinner at 5:30 on the dot, which required some adjustment on my part, but I adjusted. He never talked about the money unprompted, but one evening, maybe 6 weeks in, we were sitting on the back porch and he said, out of nowhere, I should have caught it sooner. You couldn't have, I said. They knew exactly what they were doing. I trusted her. I know. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, your grandmother would have caught it. He almost smiled. She didn't miss a thing. We sat there until it got dark. It's been about 4 months now. My parents have not apologized. What they have done is shown up at my house twice. Once in October, once last month. To, I think, test what kind of reception they'd get. The first time, my mother came alone. She stood on the porch, the same porch where she'd left my grandfather in his slippers on a 29-degree morning, and told me that she missed her father and that things had gotten out of hand, and that she hoped we could find a way to move forward. I told her that moving forward was possible, but it would require accountability, not just conversation. She left. The second time, both my parents came. My father did most of the talking that time. He said they'd made mistakes. He said the stress of caregiving had been more than they anticipated. He said he was sorry. I told him sorry was a place to start, not a place to finish. My grandfather was inside both times. He knew they were there. He didn't come to the door, and I didn't ask him to. That's his choice to make, not mine. What I will say is this. If you have an elderly person in your life, a grandparent, a parent, an aunt or uncle who is living with family members and seems confused about their finances, or seems hesitant to talk about money, or seems like they're afraid of being a burden, please take it seriously. Elder financial exploitation is one of the most underreported crimes in this country. The National Center on Elder Abuse estimates that billions of dollars are stolen from older Americans every year, and the majority of perpetrators are family members. If you're not sure where to start, call Adult Protective Services in your state. It's a free call. They are there specifically for situations like this. Or call the Elder Care Locator. It's a federally funded service at 1-800-677-1116. They can connect you with local resources including legal help, financial counseling, and caregiver support. And if you're an older person who feels like you're becoming a burden, please hear me when I say this. Needing help is not the same as being a burden. The people who made you feel that way were wrong. You deserve care. You deserve tengu. And there are people who will fight for you. My grandfather taught me that a man can spend 34 years delivering other people's mail in the snow and the heat and never once complain, and somehow still have more grace and humor and quiet decency than most people I've ever met. The least I could do was make sure someone showed up for him. That plastic grocery bag is still in my house. I never threw it away. It sits on the top shelf of my closet. And sometimes, when I pass by and the door is open, I see it and I remember what it felt like to pull it open and see one change of clothes and a bottle of blood pressure medication and a photograph of a woman who died 8 years ago. He carried her with him even when they sent him away with nothing. That's who he is, and he deserved better. He still does. I keep coming back to that plastic grocery bag. One change of clothes, blood pressure medication, a framed photograph. That's what 82 years of a life got packed into when someone decided he'd become inconvenient. And the thing is, Grandpa Walt never complained about it, not once. He sat on my couch that morning with his hands wrapped around a mug of oatmeal, and he talked about my rug and the neighbor's maple tree, because that's who he is, a man who notices things, a man who doesn't ask for more than he's given. I think about the kind of person it takes to do what my parents did, not just the morning they left him on the porch, but the 26 months before that. The slow, careful draining of an old man's savings, the signatures guided by someone else's hand, the way they made him feel month after month like staying quiet was the price of having a place to sleep. That doesn't happen in a single moment of weakness. That's a choice, repeated over and over until it becomes a pattern. And patterns have consequences, not because the universe is keeping score in some mystical ledger, but because actions leave marks on paper, on bank records, on the faces of people who trusted you. What I learned through all of this is that doing right by someone is rarely the easy thing. It wasn't easy to call Adult Protective Services on my own mother. It wasn't easy to sit in that bank office and watch my grandfather hear a number that represented years of his life being taken from him. It wasn't easy to go 11 weeks through a legal process while my phone filled up with accusations that I was the one destroying the family. But I'll tell you what I kept coming back to every time I wanted to just let it go. That image on my doorbell camera. 6:47 a.m. A man in his slippers holding a grocery bag, not ringing the bell because he wasn't sure he'd be wanted. The clarity I gained through that process, understanding the legal system, knowing what questions to ask, finding resources I didn't know existed, that knowledge didn't come from being the smartest person in the room. It came from refusing to be paralyzed by how overwhelming it felt. You figure things out when the alternative is leaving someone you love unprotected. You make the calls. You ask the dumb questions. You show up to the hearings even when you're terrified of what might happen. And the steadiness it took, showing up for him every single day while also building a legal case, while also managing my own life, while also being told repeatedly that I was wrong for doing it. That's not something I had naturally. I built it by deciding that his dignity mattered more than my comfort. That's it. That's the whole formula. Grandpa Walt reorganized my linen closet without asking. He eats dinner at 5:30. He has opinions about the news that he will share whether or not you asked. He carried a photograph of my grandmother even when they sent him away with nothing. He deserves someone who would carry something for him in return. I'm glad I was there to answer the door.